Okay. Hey everyone, welcome to this week's Chalk Talk. We are in a module that's dealing with the role of the head coach and leadership. And with us today, we have Amanda Butler, who is the head women's basketball coach at Clemson. She is currently recruiting in Valdosta. So thank you for taking the time today. I'm glad that it fit in between your two visits. She's already been to Birmingham, Alabama this morning, and she's in Valdosta now. So let's get rolling. Amanda, I sent you a few questions, just ballpark questions that students had submitted. And so we'll just kind of start with some of those. And I think the first one was, what is your personal leadership philosophy? How did you find it, create it, and how have you seen it change over time?
Well, I think there's two elements of it. Am I speaking loud enough for you guys to hear me? And I apologize for continuing to check in, but I'm in a restaurant. I think there's two elements of it that, for me at this point in my career and my leadership journey, have really evolved as the two most important parts of my leadership philosophy, and that is authenticity and what that looks like and how to teach it and how to model it. So obviously there's a lot of great discussion around self-awareness and being genuine and knowing yourself. And then the other component is love. And then what does that look like in my world as a leader, not just of a team, but also of a staff, and how to weave those two together in a way that's not, that's just sort of organic, somewhat planned, but always authentic.
You also, you talk about authenticity and love. And one of the questions a student asks is, what values are most important to you as a leader? Are there any other values besides those two?
Yeah, I get confused. Probably should take your leadership course into what constitutes a value, and then what are words or qualities or elements of leadership that fall into other categories. But really specifically in our environment, we've tried to brand our culture, and we've branded our culture around three different characteristics, elements, values. I'm not sure exactly what the right word is, but those are trust, loyalty, and commitment. And each one of those kind of talks about a different realm of the way that we hope that our family operates through the good times and the bad. The trust is a nod specifically to the relationship and the connection, and it's very intentional that it's first. Loyalty is the acknowledgement. It's an element of humility and the acknowledgement that I'm part of something that is bigger than me. I'm important, I'm significant, but I am just a part of something else. And hopefully my part is serving that greater good. And then the C, the commitment, is specifically about the process, the how to. How does it operate? How do these things become actionable things that we see playing out every day in practice, or in the locker room, or in the office, or wherever the opportunities are for our culture to live?
And guys, I'll open up the floor after this next question. I'm trying to figure out how to answer it. How have you seen the role of culture evolve and through leadership? Like, where does culture have a different place than it did 10 years ago?
No, I don't think it has a different place. I just think that it looks very, very different. I think that when I say I'm speaking mainly about coaching and coaching at the collegiate level, because that's really the only thing that I've done, which has been awesome. But maybe I have sort of a single lane view of the way the world works, because that's been my lens. I think the way that it's articulated and the way that it's taught has changed significantly over the past 10 years, as our society has evolved, and I'd like to think a lot of very, very positive ways. Then it's had to change the way that we teach culture, how intentional we are about it, as I think as generations has evolved, and that's that's a positive thing. I'm not one of these older coaches. It's like these, kids these days, they, you just can't do this or you can't do that. I think these are all really good elements where we've seen teams grow, the things that we've had to pay more attention to, all of that. So are you guys all still with me? Okay, everybody was frozen for a minute. There we go. Everybody's moving again.
Well, the good news is
I
that
don't know if that,
we can hear you perfectly fine. So don't worry about the video because
okay.
your phone's good.
Maybe if it freezes, it'll freeze like this. I'll sit like this while I'm talking, and then if it freezes, then this will be. How's this? Does this look good? Sorry, Jana. I'll be serious.
Yeah, everyone just sees how lucky I am. Sarah, like Caitlin, Chet, does anybody have a question? You want me to keep going?
I can ask a question.
I thought you might.
Hey, Coach Butler.
Hey, Chet.
My name is Chet Bickhart. I'm coming to you live from Philadelphia. I am a semi-professional competitive athlete with Team USA. I'm a rower. And so I joined the MSAL program this semester. Once I finish this semester, I'll be finishing up my first year in the program. And so my question to you, Coach Butler, does your team have any intentional leadership development curriculum for your student athletes, or does your team depend on the athletic department as a whole to provide that, or is there nothing existent altogether?
Yes and yes. So the answers to the first two, I will, in full disclosure, I think that our leadership and our leadership opportunities and our leadership academy that our athletic department offers to our student athletes, which is very selective. It's not open to everyone. There's an application process. There's interview. There's feedback from coaches. There's a lot of different steps that have to take place before someone's accepted into it. Is outstanding compared to what I've experienced in the past. And so when I had been at other places where there were not leadership academies or there weren't those type of really formal leadership training opportunities for our student athletes, then I have tried to supplement that. When I was at the University of Florida, within our team, we had a group that was completely voluntary that we called Learn to Lead. And that's exactly what it was. It was not specific to women's basketball. It was specific to leadership. And I am not a doctor like Dr. Majette. And so the curriculum, I'm sure, was bootleg at best, but it was very practical, I would like to think, and relatable to the things that I thought that the women that had chosen to be in there could use as tools and training and conversation builders or whatever they needed. I'm not as consistent with that, but I am very intentional about identifying who on my team needs leadership training, and whether it comes through me or through an assistant. I also have a woman on my staff who was one of my assistant coaches. Her name is Joy Williams, and she is our director of quality control. And she has had some really specific training on being a life coach. And so very often, if there's someone that we really feel like is at a deficit, then we'll really have Joy jump in there and try to set up a consistent time with them weekly or whatever the case may be. So there's we do things really well in the leadership space in Clemson, in my opinion. And so what I try to do within our program is just supplement that.
Yeah, that's really cool. Thanks for expounding on that a little bit. Jenna, I have one follow-up question with it, if it's possible. How do you quantify the growth of your student athletes in Clemson's program? And if I know you said that it's selective, so if they don't go through that program and you do your own thing with the team, is there a way that you can quantify the growth over a 4-year period or however long they might be a part of it? And if so, what does that look like?
Yeah, it would be very informal. I think that trying to quantify it is a very intimidating way to describe it. But I think, again, we're looking at it as a coaching staff just in very practical terms, which is if we chose to look at behaviors or results that were the ripple effect of behaviors from someone as a freshman and then looking at them as a senior, and trying to very objectively look at them, that would be the way that a filter that we would evaluate them. I think it would probably be untrue for me to say that there is any way to that we in any sort of way formally quantify that growth. It's very probably anecdotal at best. You know,
very hard, I imagine. Like you've said a couple times now how relational it is, right? And that's something I'm curious about and interested in learning more how to do it well. And so I was curious to see how you guys do it. But you're right, it's difficult and it's very relational. So thank you.
It's very subjective. Yeah, it's very subjective. And I think, you know, one way, if I was going to be maybe a little bit more formal in quantifying that growth, it would be, you know, our filter would probably be a TLC lens of going, okay, here are the 3 areas that we're going to evaluate someone on. You know, when they enter the program, when they're leaving the program, do we see specific growth in these 3 areas that we've identified as markers of, you know, things that we want to hold up in our program.
I think, Chet, too, I could put you in touch with Tori Neiman, who's running student athlete development and the Tiger Leadership Academy. I imagine they do some pre and post surveys and rely on some anecdotal feedback. So, but I can make that connection for you.
Yeah, Tori Neiman.
Like Neiman Marcus.
Yeah. I'll follow up with you, Jenna. Yeah, I would be interested in reaching out to her.
And I think, Amanda, like the other thing that y'all do here that maybe isn't leadership specific, but I think is personal development is BOC or cultural development, however you want to, maybe you could tell Chet a little bit about that. And like Caitlin, if you have anything to chime in, and Sarah, since y'all have been in the BOCs, to get your perspective as well, be helpful.
So I think that would be more of, as I scroll through your questions, Jana, of like, how do we build and cultivate leadership within our team, since we're not necessarily doing it in a formal way. There's not a learn to lead group anymore. You know, in general, Chet and also Sarah and Caitlin, whatever as the leader of the program I choose to give time to is an implication of like, this is important. And so how do we build and cultivate leadership within the program? We spend time talking about it. We spend time defining and giving language to the things that we don't want to assume. We don't want to assume when we use a word like culture or we use a word like trust or, you know, whatever it may be, that everyone knows what it is. And then as we only have 20 hours a week to train, within that 20 hours a week, if every single week I'm saying minimally we're going to devote as a team an hour to this, we're going to take an hour away from the weight room or an hour away from the court. I think that's how we're really trying to build culture from within, is also demonstrating this is important. And the thing that's really unique about that aspect of it is probably where I'm challenged the most on that is with my staff. When we have weeks that are really hard and they're really full, and you know, my staff said, hey, do we really need to do BOC this week? Our Breakfast of Champions, what we called it. And so I'm also trying to make, you know, build culture within my staff when every single week I still say, yeah, we're doing it. I know it sucks. I know that means we're going to have to all get up 30 minutes earlier, or maybe I have to cut it short because of our class schedule, but we're doing it because it's important. And I want to keep consistently sending that message to everyone.
Sarah, like Caitlin, do y'all have anything to add about BOC and your experiences with it, since you're both pretty new? You don't have to. I'm just trying to loop you in. So Amanda, y'all think about it. If you do, I mean, we can come back. One of the questions that I pulled for you that I thought was really interesting, because you talk about this a lot and they use a different word, but they say, what are some characteristics of leadership that are uncommon in leaders? And I hear you talk about unnatural skills a lot. And so I thought that would be something interesting for everyone to hear.
Yeah, I mean, I think unnatural skills are they're not common for anyone. They're not common for humans. You know, there's so much out there now that you can read about the way that our brains are wired to protect ourselves. You know, when we were created, there was so much about survival that went into the way that we were created. And so a lot of those skills, those survival skills, they don't align with things like being vulnerable. They don't align with doing things that make you feel uncomfortable. They don't align with things that are going to require more energy, because our body is always trying to conserve our energy, whether that be actual physical energy or mental or emotional energy. And so those uncommon or those unnatural skills, they go against, I guess you could even say, our human biology in a way. But they're the things that we all face in teams, like everybody's fired. For example, for us right now, everybody's fired up to work hard. Everybody fired up, like, let's go, give me extra shooting, give me extra time. I want more film. I want everything that I can get from my coaches. And, you know, Chet, I don't know how familiar you are with our season and the timeline of it, but as we get into November and then we get into December and we're playing games, there's going to be some people who don't play. Are they going to be as fired up in the middle of December to still seek the extra work, you know, like they're seeking it right now in September? And so, you know, our brains would tell us no. It'd be like, well, start to find something else, you know, to direct your energy towards. And so we try to talk about that a whole lot right now in the less dramatic, calm moments, that this is a challenge you're going to have. And if you can build this unnatural awareness or unnatural acceptance, maybe, that what you think you deserve might not actually be what happens. Therefore, you're going to at some point have to still choose it. It's just going to be harder to choose it. And we have a scripture in our locker room, Galatians 6:9, don't grow weary in doing good, for in due time you'll reap the harvest if you don't give up. And don't grow weary in doing good. Everybody will stand up and cheer for that. In due time is what sucks, because it's an acknowledgement that we are not necessarily in charge of the timelines. How much work we're putting in may not align with the desired result when we want it or when we think we should get it. And so we still want the harvest, but we've got to submit ourselves to what due time means. And that's kind of vague. It's hard. Does that mean I got to work? I'm not going to get my harvest until I'm a junior? Does that mean it's not coming until, you know, February? Like, what does that mean? So we talk a lot about training those unnatural skills, because everybody's going to be tested in that regard at some point. It might not be playing time. It might be an injury. It might be, but it's all the things that at some point everyone that's been in competitive sports has said, well, that's not fair. You know, it's not fair that happened. We've all, maybe if we didn't say it out loud, we've all felt it. What do we do with that feeling? Are we still compelled to work hard? Are we still compelled to be a good teammate? Are we still compelled to go the extra mile, whatever that means, when we're not reaping the harvest?
Man, Coach Butler, that's so cool. You just reminded me of so many reasons why I love the South. Being from the Northeast, you cannot. Well, I don't know if you cannot. Most people don't incorporate scripture into their team culture, and I'm encouraged by the fact that you guys get to do that. And what's also really cool, and I'm hearing from all this, is just the intentionality behind spiritual growth. But what I mean by that is not really like a person's spirituality. I mean an understanding of their why they are there, right? And then you also got, it sounds like you're really intentional about setting expectations, right? And if you can align those things together in tune with your values and the behaviors that your student athletes are exhibiting every single day, you can create a very successful and fruitful team culture that grows on the sturdy foundation of values, and there's an understanding of the expectations and behaviors that are going to get you there, and people knowing their why they are there. Are they there just to play, or are they there to grow more transformationally rather than transactionally? And we've been learning a lot about that in this past module about transformational leadership. So it's really cool that we get a glimpse into how transformational formative your team is?
So I have
I hope so. I hope so. Thanks.
two
Go ahead,
things.
Jen, sorry.
I'm gonna add this because Amanda won't, and which is understandable. Chet, Sarah, Caitlin, anybody else who chooses to listen to this, you need to also be mindful of when you are making choices about the next steps in your career, that you are attaching yourself to leadership, administration, whatever, supervisors whose values are in line with yours. Because not every place in the South, since you brought the South, Chet, would be supportive of a scripture on the wall in a locker room. So that's just be mindful as you kind of navigate your career decisions. The other thing, Chet, that you made me think of is one of the questions I ask teams. Like when I go and work with the team, I usually send them like a preliminary email, and I want just responses to kind of get a baseline of like what I'm walking into. And one of the questions is, what is the best thing about playing basketball, women's basketball at Clemson, right? What is the best thing about playing softball at Alabama Huntsville? Or what is your favorite part? And like, and the answers you get back tell you a lot about their why, because it's like my teammates, I love the game, or I get my education paid for. Like that's been on there too. So that immediately just tells you like kind of where their hearts are at with their motivation for what they're doing. Amanda, another question is,
can I go back to that one for just a second? Because
yeah.
I think it's really trendy, the whole know your why, and I believe that 100%. But the thing that we refer to more often in our program, and that we refer to very, very often in recruiting, is not your why, but your who factor. Because I think you have to know who you are before you can start talking about why you do something. So we very rarely have conversations about our why, and we talk way more about our who, our individual who and our collective who. And that's another Breakfast of Champions lesson that we try to get in there early on, is basketball is what I do, but it's not who I am. It's just what I do. And even in recruiting, I mean, we have a huge part of this. It's part of our recruiting of really, as we try to get to know the young women that we're recruiting, of really challenging them on like, tell me who you are. I know what your jump shot looks like. I know how big you are, how high you can jump, or any of those things. And, and even like Caitlin can attest to this, when we were interviewing her for one of our graduate assistant spots, and we were doing it like this over Zoom, is, hey, I can read your resume. That's easy. But tell me who you are. And then that's going to, until you really have a good firm grasp of that, I don't know that you can really talk about your why, because your why is probably going to shift and be way more dependent upon your circumstances, which aren't who you are. Those shifts and change. So.
Another question we had, how do you think leadership skills differentiate between men and women?
I don't think that they differentiate. I mean, I think we all have the opportunity to grow our skill set in different ways. I think probably what is differentiated is the ways that those skills are observed and received by people. And that's, for me, then what that really underscores is, not that like I got to be more like the boys, or what the boys are doing. They need to have more, of the traditional or old school soft skills like the girls do. It's much more, for me, as a person who gets to create a little bit of my own environment, of really, really making sure that we have a tremendous amount of diversity on our staff. And, and so, for example, speaking to the gender part of it, I will always have a man on my staff, I think. I have to this point anyway, because he's going to have probably a little bit of a different perspective than me, but more importantly, he's just going to be received differently by certain groups than I am. And so I don't know that the skill sets themselves actually differentiate tremendously, but we still live in a world where they're received and they're evaluated and they're observed very differently.
Could you speak a little bit to that end on your gap year? So in between Florida and Clemson, we traveled, we went to Boston. Amanda worked with the Celtics. She worked with the Oklahoma City Thunder and the Blue, Detroit Pistons. I mean, you were in a lot of different spaces as the only woman. Could you tell us a little bit about that and kind of some of your takeaways?
Well, as it relates to gender, it was just such a head scratcher to me, and it still is in college men's basketball, why they don't have more women in their environment, not to satisfy any sort of, quota or like human resources on them. We need to have women in here, but they're truly trying to gain a competitive advantage. We all are. We're trying to gain a competitive advantage in all of our spaces. And everybody came into this world by having a mama. Now, what their biological mother or their mama or their mother or whatever then the way that role went on through their life, that's obviously very different with a lot of people. However, I would venture that a majority of the men who are playing basketball in the NBA and the G League, as well as the young men who are playing college basketball, have really, really important, strong female presence in their life. And then they get into an environment where there's no female presence except for maybe a student worker who's stuffing envelopes, or someone who's answering a phone, or an academic counselor, or a marketing person, whatever. And I just like, competitively, what a huge advantage it would be to have someone on your staff that represents someone other than the father figure that is what they sell in recruiting all the time, because it's much more common for, especially a college boy, to have his life has been led by his mother or his grandmother or his aunt or whatever, and sometimes there's a male figure in there and sometimes there's not. Yet the staffs are not set up for him to have that mother figure that also happens to know basketball and also happens to maybe be a heck of a leader. And so that was a great conversation that I was very privileged to have with a few different folks that allowed me to come into their programs and their organizations and their buildings, where I was just like, why not? And the answers were horrible. They weren't discriminatory or anything like that. They were just like, kind of like, well, I don't know, that's a good point. Never really thought of it, And so it's like, I think diversifying our environment, and right now, obviously, we're talking about from a gender perspective, it can lend a competitive advantage. And we can talk about culture, and we can talk about how we define success and all those sort of things. But at the end of the day, we all want to win. So if there's another pathway to winning that can support winning, why would you not explore it as far as you possibly can? Beyond that year was just a tremendous amount of learning. It was great lessons in having an open mind in the way that people teach and communicate. And I think that where college athletics is heading right now is very much more a spirit of partnership than this old school hierarchy where it's like the head coach, the assistant coaches, like the triangle from the head coach or the athletic director down has kind of been flipped upside down, and the student athlete voice now is way more important. And I think that's a positive thing. And so I think the spirit of partnership was something I really got to see firsthand in the NBA and the G League as well, because the head coach can be replaced mid-season. The guy on the max contract, he ain't going nowhere. So the head coach has to partner with his players to have longevity, and hopefully it's a good pathway to winning as well.
Thank you for that. Does anybody have any follow-ups? Sarah, were you unmuting?
And kind of following up on your leadership philosophy, just something that I've noticed since coming to Clemson and being around your team and your staff is it's very, like, I grew up in sports and playing in college, and the seniors and the head coach were always the leaders and like always making the decisions. It was never the freshmen speaking up or the assistant coach speaking up. So was that something which, and I've noticed around here, it's kind of all across the board, you know, the best player, the senior, the fifth year is speaking just as much as the freshman, or the assistant coach is speaking just as much as the head coach. Is that something you've instilled from your own leadership philosophy to your coaching staff and team, or is that like unintentional, intentional? Just,
I think it's very intentional for me. I really want to be thought of as a leader, as a collaborator. You know, I am of average intelligence and average creativity, and there's a lot of spaces where I'm probably really average. And so I hope my intelligence shows up in the way.
Me. I didn't marry average. Thanks.
So I think where I'm above average, this is a nod to Dr. Majette, is in choosing the people that have, you know, that I surround myself with, that, you know, they're smarter than me or more creative than me or more detailed or better problem solvers or whatever the case may be. But again, I think it really works hand in hand with this spirit of diversity, of like, get as many different ideas as you can in the room, and then try to sort out through all those different ideas and different angles that you attack the problem with or the strategy with, and try to figure out what's the best and what leads to winning. And so I want to know what everybody has to say. And then specifically as a leader of my staff, and of my players, not as competitors, but as women who are hopefully going to get the chance to lead next in their careers, I really want to challenge them to know what they think about things and to be able to articulate it and to say it with confidence and not apologetically or in a small fashion because their experience is not as great or they are the only woman in a room full of men. Those are circumstances, and those circumstances might be the reality of your job or the reality of your environment or not. But I really hope that I'm empowering everybody in my under my leadership umbrella to know what they think and then be able to put it to words and then have the guts to raise their hand and say it.
I had a question, Coach Miller. What keeps you motivated mid-season when your team hasn't, or they're slacking in, completely buying into the culture that you have? And what keeps you going and keeps you pressing that same culture?
Yeah, well, I think that goes back to one of the earlier conversations when we're talking about cultivating unnatural skills. That's not just in my players. You know, that's all of us. We've all got to possess a layer of unnatural skills because we're all going to be discouraged or experience the failure. And that's what that feels like when you're the head coach and you feel like you don't have the buy-in. And I think the natural skills, the evolutionary survival skills says, blame everybody else. They're just bad kids, or they just don't care, or they. And so I'm, you know, and this is maybe the control freak in me, which I hope is not a big part of me, but I really want to feel like that I'm impacting my environment. And so I never want to blame other people. I just want, so in that scenario that you just described, I want to look in the mirror and go, okay, well, what was I doing wrong that they weren't buying in? You know, what were we not doing enough of that they didn't understand that was important? And sometimes that answer lies within me, and sometimes that's me going to them going, hey, here's what I see, guys. I think I'm doing my best to try to teach you guys what I think is important within our culture, but you guys aren't living it out. So what part, where's the gap? And maybe that answer isn't always in me, but I hope the strategy is in me to figure it out. And thank you. And so to maybe specifically answer your question, you know, going back, tying all these things together, I really enjoy being a strategist. I really enjoy feeling like I'm solving problems. And so the problem probably satisfies something in me because if there wasn't a problem, then there'd be nothing to solve, and then that makes me feel a certain kind of way about myself. So I don't get discouraged by those things. I'm not demotivated by that. I'm actually very often energized by like, okay, well, plans A and B suck. So now what's plan C going to be? Let's go get it. Let's figure that
out. Does anybody else have any questions? I will say that one of the more impressive things that Amanda does, and this doesn't really like exactly fit, but I think it does, like Caitlin, a little bit to what you asked, but like she always watches the game film immediately after the game. Like she won't go to bed until the game film's been watched. And I think for a lot of folks, it'd be very easy to like skip that step, whether that's like it was an easy win, right? Or it was a very hard, emotional, brutal loss. Like you're not ready to see it again. But I think that shows a level of toughness and commitment by Amanda, to like just sit there and learn from it, no matter the outcome, while it's all fresh. I'd be surprised how many folks actually do that as consistently as she does. Another question, Amanda, have you seen your own leadership philosophy change over time, or does it vary depending on situation?
Well, I would like to think that I have the leadership depth and breadth that I view each situation as its own. But definitely, I feel like I've evolved as a leader over time as I've experienced so many different things. And, it's not a brand new notion. I mean, especially when, like what Caitlin said, you go through a season where maybe you felt like you were doing everything right, but there still wasn't the level of buy-in. I think a good leader then tweaks the way they're leading and looks at like, well, okay, here's how I approached that year. Or here's the messages that I was using, or how I was trying to build those messages within the team. And maybe there was something wrong. And then sometimes, and this is not to blame the players, and then sometimes you have to go back and look at the filter through which you chose people to be part of the program. Maybe that part of how you're leading has to be reevaluated. Because as I get older, I hope that I've become more and more and more acquainted with my who factor in a way that helps me select people that are going to respond to my style of leadership in a way where I'm not having to change and always morph and be super flexible about who I am to reach people, but that I'm doing a better job of presenting who I am on the front end so that it attracts the people that are going to be good followers for the way that I lead. But I definitely, I think, had a much more, old school, traditional, not my way or the highway, but, a toughness at all costs. That's a part of me that I have to sometimes put on pause because I do value toughness and I admire it and I want to model it. But my version of toughness is not for everyone. And my leadership style has had to accommodate for toughness showing up in other ways than the probably old school, traditional way in which I've always tried to live out toughness.
Does anyone else have any questions? V, do you have a question?
Yeah, how was your day?
My day or Jana's day?
Everybody.
My day is empty because my players aren't in it. It feels empty and hollow.
Oh, just
right
your
now.
players? Just your players?
And my family and my staff and my new friends, like Chef. Feels empty because I'm in a restaurant.
Does anybody have any other questions to kind of wrap this up? We're about 45 minutes or so. I think that's pretty good. And Amanda's in a restaurant. I know she's trying to be courteous to her dining neighbors. Does anybody have any?
Not really anymore. I was at first. I'm not really anymore. I'm kind of over it. Second glass of sweet tea, hopped up on sugar. So.
If last question then, you're speaking to, Sarah and like Caitlin, right? You're speaking to a group. Hopefully more people are going to watch this. you're speaking to a group of people, some who are still figuring it out, their paths, their passions, right? We're learning about leadership. We're learning about ourselves. They're going to have to create their own leadership philosophy statement later this semester. What is your advice to them in that process of self-discovery or self-creation?
Yeah, so I think it's two things that are very, very different. I think the first thing you have to do is you really have to sit with yourself, so whether that be kind of evaluating things like if you're someone who prays, what am I praying about the most? Or if you're someone who meditates, what are the thoughts that are going through my head that, distract me from, being able to have a clear mind, and those are two examples of kind of sitting with yourself. The big birthday party is over here too. Big turn up here in Valdosta today at lunch. The other thing I think is the other side of that is seeking wise counsel is something that we try to use in our program a lot, and we use is like go to people who know more than you, have experienced more than you, and ask them for help. Well, very often, I think that help could be like, hey, give me feedback about me. You've evaluated a whole lot of people over your career. I'm trying to figure out who I am. You sit with yourself, but then ask that person who can maybe serve as wise counsel for you for feedback on yourself and your strengths and weaknesses and the parts of your leadership that are very apparent and well developed, and then the parts that are non-existent right now. So I think sit with yourself, seek wise counsel.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Guys, thanks for hopping on here and being with us. Amanda, safe travels.
Thank
Go
you.
Tigers.
Go Tigers. Bye, everyone.